call that changed everything. Detective Matt Stone, retired, sat in his usual spot at Murphy's Diner, stirring his black coffee with the methodical precision of someone who had spent 32 years following routines. The worn vinyl booth creaked beneath his weight as he shifted, watching the morning rush of commuters through the rain-streaked window. At 64, 3 years into retirement from the Chicago Police Department, Matt had settled into a comfortable predictability that his younger self would have found suffocating. Morning coffee at Murphy's, where old-timer cops gathered to solve the world's problems over eggs and hash browns. Afternoon walks through Lincoln Park, where he'd count the joggers and wonder if any of them were running from something more than just poor health. Evening news with his wife Sarah, both of them commenting on the cases that reminded him of his days working homicide. The diner buzzed with familiar conversations. Officer Patricia Williams, still on active duty, complained about new paperwork requirements. Sergeant Bob Chun discussed his upcoming retirement party. The comfortable chatter of men and women who had spent their lives in service, now trying to figure out what came next. Matt's phone buzzed against the Formica table. The caller ID showed Detective Ray Martinez, his former partner, and one of the few people from the job he still spoke to regularly. Ray never called unless something was wrong. It was an unwritten rule among retired cops. You didn't drag each other back into the world you'd left behind unless it was absolutely necessary. Matt, we need to talk. It's about Sarah. The words hit him like a physical blow. Matt's grip tightened on his coffee cup, the ceramic warming his suddenly cold fingers. His wife of 37 years, Sarah, worked as a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm downtown. She left every morning at 7:30 a.m., returned home by 6 p.m., and spent her evenings reading mystery novels or watching cooking shows. What could possibly involve her with active police business? Can't discuss it over the phone, Ray continued, his voice carrying that familiar tension Matt remembered from their years working homicide together. The careful tone cops used when they were about to deliver news that would change someone's life forever. Meet me at the precinct. And Matt, come alone. The line went dead. Matt stared at his phone, his mind racing through possibilities. Car accident? Witness to a crime? Some kind of mistaken identity? In 32 years of police work, he had learned that the most innocent explanations were usually wrong, but he clung to them anyway. He left his coffee half-finished and drove through Chicago's morning traffic, his hands gripping the steering wheel with the same intensity he'd once reserved for high-speed chases. The city looked different somehow, more threatening. Every red light felt like an eternity. Every siren in the distance made his pulse quicken. Chapter 2. The Revelation. The 14th District Police Station hadn't changed much in the 3 years since Matt's retirement. The same institutional green walls, the same fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill, the same smell of old coffee and disinfectant. But walking through those doors as a civilian, about to hear something terrible about his wife, felt entirely different from his thousands of visits as a working detective. Matt Stone walked into the building like he had thousands of times before, but this time felt different. The familiar sounds of ringing phones, distant conversations, and clicking keyboards seemed muted, as if he were hearing them through water. Officers nodded at him with a respectful recognition reserved for retired veterans, but their eyes held something else. Pity, perhaps, or foreknowledge of what was coming. Ray Martinez waited in interview room 3, along with 2 detectives Matt didn't recognize. The room was exactly as he remembered. Harsh lighting, metal table, chairs designed to be uncomfortable enough to encourage confessions. He had conducted hundreds of interviews in this room, but he had never sat on this side of the table. Matt, sit down, Ray said, his eyes avoiding direct contact. In all their years as partners, Ray had never looked away from bad news. This was worse than Matt had imagined. What's this about Sarah? Ray opened a manila folder with the careful deliberation of someone who had practiced this moment. The photographs that spilled out across the metal table shattered Matt's world like a sledgehammer through glass. Sarah, meeting with various individuals at different locations around the city. Bank records showing transactions he had never heard of. Cell phone transcripts of conversations that revealed a completely different person than the woman he shared breakfast with every morning. Surveillance photos dating back months, showing his wife living a life he knew nothing about. "We believe Sarah is involved in an identity theft ring," said Detective Lisa Chun, one of the younger officers. Her voice was professional but gentle, the tone reserved for delivering devastating news to family members. A sophisticated operation targeting elderly residents across 3 counties. Matt's world tilted on its axis. The photographs on the table showed Sarah in places he had never seen her, with people he had never met. She looked comfortable, confident, like she belonged in this criminal world. How had he missed this? How had a detective with 32 years of experience failed to notice that his own wife was living a double life? "That's impossible," Matt said, his voice sounding hollow even to himself. "Sarah works for Henderson and Associates. She's been there for 15 years. She complains about her boss, about difficult clients, about tax season deadlines." "Matt," Ray said gently, leaning forward with the same posture he had used to deliver bad news to countless families over the years. "Henderson and Associates is a shell company. Has been for the past 18 months. Sarah and her associates have been running a complex financial fraud operation, specifically targeting seniors with dementia and Alzheimer's." The words hit Matt like physical blows. Each sentence rewrote his understanding of the past 18 months, the past 15 years, possibly their entire marriage. If Sarah could lie about her job, about her daily activities, about the fundamental nature of who she was, what else had been fabricated? Detective Chin opened another folder, this one containing victim statements. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, 87, had lost her life savings of $127,000. The Kowalski family had been forced to sell their home to pay for care after someone had emptied their father's retirement accounts. An elderly veteran named James Morrison had been scammed out of his disability benefits and now lived in a nursing home funded by charity. These people trusted her, Detective Chin said quietly. She presented herself as a helpful bookkeeper, someone who could manage their finances and help them navigate complicated paperwork. Instead, she systematically robbed them. Chapter 3. The Weight of Truth. Matt stared at the evidence spread across the table, his trained eye automatically cataloging the thoroughness of the investigation. Sarah's daily routine suddenly made horrifying sense. The late nights she claimed were due to tax season extended far beyond April. The new expensive clothes, she said, came from clearance sales, a $300 designer purse here, a $500 coat there. The hush phone conversations that stopped abruptly when he entered the room. How had he missed the signs? Matt had spent 3 decades reading people, detecting deception, following money trails. Yet his own wife had been conducting a criminal enterprise under his nose, and he had been completely blind to it. "How long have you known?" Matt asked, his voice barely above a whisper. 6 months, Ray admitted, his face showing the strain of keeping this secret. "We've been watching the operation, trying to identify all the players. We hope we were wrong about Sarah. We kept looking for evidence that would clear her, but it just kept getting worse." Matt's professional pride battled with personal devastation. For 32 years, he had hunted criminals, brought justice to victims, upheld the law with unwavering dedication. He had testified in court, put murderers behind bars, and slept peacefully knowing he was making the world a safer place. Now he was sitting across from evidence that his own wife was everything he had spent his career fighting against. The irony was devastating. While he had been chasing killers and drug dealers, the real criminal had been sharing his bed, cooking his meals, and listening to his stories about the importance of justice and integrity. "There's more," Detective Chin said, opening a 3rd folder. "We believe Sarah has been involved in romantic fraud as well. She's been cultivating relationships with elderly men, gaining their trust, and then convincing them to give her access to their accounts." Matt felt physically ill. Romantic fraud? She presents herself as a widow, someone who understands loss and loneliness. She's been seeing at least 3 different men regularly, all of them over 70, all of them recently widowed or divorced. The betrayal cut deeper than Matt had thought possible. It wasn't just about the money or the victims, though those were devastating enough. Sarah had been conducting emotional affairs, manipulating vulnerable men who reminded him of his own father, his own future self. "Do you know where Sarah is right now?" Detective Chin asked. Matt pulled out his phone, his hands shaking slightly as he checked Sarah's location sharing. They had set it up 2 years ago when she had started working later hours. She said she was visiting her sister in Milwaukee. Said she'd be back tonight. "Which sister?" Ray asked quietly, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Matt looked up sharply. "Linda, her younger sister. She lives in Milwaukee with her husband and 2 kids. Ray and Detective Chun exchanged glances. The look that passed between them was full of the weary recognition that comes from years of delivering bad news. "Matt," Ray said, "Sarah doesn't have a sister. She's an only child. We verified her family records when we started the investigation. Her parents died in a car accident when she was 22. She has no living relatives." The room seemed to spin around Matt. 37 years of marriage, and he was discovering that he didn't know his wife at all. The sister she visited several times a year, the niece and nephew she bought Christmas presents for, the family stories she shared, all of it was fabricated. Chapter 4. The Investigation. Matt returned to his suburban Chicago home on Maple Street, seeing it through different eyes. The house he had shared with Sarah for 23 years now felt like a crime scene. Every room held potential evidence. Every personal item might be part of an elaborate deception. The neighborhood looked the same: neat lawns, 2-car garages, the kind of middle-class stability that Matt had worked his entire career to achieve. But he now wondered what secrets his neighbors were hiding, what lies they were telling their spouses, what crimes they were committing behind closed doors. Using his decades of investigative experience, Matt began searching systematically. He started with Sarah's home office, a small room she had claimed as her workspace for her bookkeeping business. He had rarely entered this room, respecting her privacy and her need for a quiet space to work. The office looked normal at first glance. Bookshelves filled with accounting textbooks and reference materials. A computer desk with a printer and filing cabinets. Tax preparation software and financial planning guides. But Matt's trained eye noticed inconsistencies. The books were too neat, like they had been arranged for show rather than regular use. The computer had no personal photos, no screensaver, nothing that suggested regular personal use. In Sarah's desk, behind a false panel that Matt discovered by accident when the drawer stuck, he found a cache of documents that made his blood run cold. Multiple driver's licenses with Sarah's photo, but different names: Janet Morrison, Linda Patterson, Margaret Chin. Credit cards issued to these various identities, each with different billing addresses across the Chicago metropolitan area. Most damning was a detailed notebook, written in Sarah's careful handwriting, containing names, addresses, and financial information of elderly victims. Notes about their health conditions, their family situations, their vulnerabilities. Calculations showing how much money could be extracted from each target. Clinical, methodical notes about human beings reduced to their financial value. Matt read through page after page of his wife's careful documentation of her crimes. She had been meticulous, organized, professional in her approach to destroying people's lives. The woman who forgot to pay their electric bill on time had been running a sophisticated criminal enterprise with the precision of a Fortune 500 company. The phone rang, startling Matt from his investigation. Sarah's voice, warm and familiar, made his stomach clench with a mixture of love and revulsion. "Hi, honey. I'm going to stay one more night. Linda's doing much better, but want to make sure she's back on her feet before I leave." Matt closed his eyes, forcing his voice to remain steady. "Sarah, how's Linda feeling?" A pause. Even over the phone, Matt could hear the slight hesitation that he had missed countless times before. "Much better. The flu really knocked her out, but she's finally keeping food down." "Give her my love," Matt said, testing her reaction. "Of course, sweetie. I'll tell her you're thinking of her." Matt hung up and stared at the evidence surrounding him. Sarah had just lied to him with the same ease she had probably lied to their victims. The casual way she had referenced a sister who didn't exist, a sickness that wasn't real, a life that was completely fabricated. He made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He would find out exactly who his wife really was, and then he would do what 32 years of police work had taught him was right. The office looked normal at first glance. Bookshelves filled with accounting textbooks and reference materials. A computer desk with a printer and filing cabinets. Tax preparation software and financial planning guides. But Matt's trained eye noticed inconsistencies. The books were too neat, like they had been arranged for show rather than regular use. The computer had no personal photos, no screensaver, nothing that suggested regular personal use. In Sarah's desk, behind a false panel that Matt discovered by accident when the drawer stuck, he found a cache of documents that made his blood run cold. Multiple driver's licenses with Sarah's photo, but different names. Janet Morrison, Linda Patterson, Margaret Shin. Credit cards issued to these various identities, each with different billing addresses across the Chicago metropolitan area. Most damning was a detailed notebook, written in Sarah's careful handwriting, containing names, addresses, and financial information of elderly victims. Notes about their health conditions, their family situations, their vulnerabilities. Calculations showing how much money could be extracted from each target. Clinical, methodical notes about human beings reduced to their financial value. Matt read through page after page of his wife's careful documentation of her crimes. She had been meticulous, organized, professional in her approach to destroying people's lives. The woman who forgot to pay their electric bill on time had been running a sophisticated criminal enterprise with the precision of a Fortune 500 company. The phone rang, startling Matt from his investigation. Sarah's voice, warm and familiar, made his stomach clench with a mixture of love and revulsion. "Hi, honey. I'm going to stay one more night. Linda's doing much better, but I want to make sure she's back on her feet before I leave." Matt closed his eyes, forcing his voice to remain steady. "Sarah, how's Linda feeling?" A pause. Even over the phone, Matt could hear the slight hesitation that he had missed countless times before. "Much better. The flu really knocked her out, but she's finally keeping food down." "Give her my love," Matt said, testing her reaction. "Of course, sweetie. I'll tell her you're thinking of her." Matt hung up and stared at the evidence surrounding him. Sarah had just lied to him with the same ease she had probably lied to their victims. The casual way she had referenced a sister who didn't exist, a sickness that wasn't real, a life that was completely fabricated. He made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He would find out exactly who his wife really was, and then he would do what 32 years of police work had taught him was right. The confession. Sarah's carefully constructed composure began to crack. The confident criminal mastermind dissolved, replaced by the woman Matt thought he had married. Tears began to fall, smearing her makeup and making her look older, more vulnerable. "Matt, I can explain everything." "Then explain. Start with how many elderly people you've robbed." "It wasn't supposed to be like this," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "When you retired, our finances, the pension wasn't enough. The medical bills from your heart attack last year, the mortgage that still had 10 years left, the college loans for the kids that we're still paying." Matt felt a flash of anger. "So you decided to steal from old people." "It started small, just helping people with their paperwork, their bills. There's so much bureaucracy, so many forms that elderly people can't understand. I would help them organize their finances, make sure their bills were paid on time." "And when did that turn into theft?" Sarah looked down at her hands, no longer able to meet his eyes. "Robert, the man who was just here, he runs a network of people who help seniors with financial planning. He showed me how we could do more than just help them organize their money. We could help them invest it, manage it more efficiently, by stealing it, by redirecting it to better opportunities. Most of these people were just leaving their money in savings accounts, earning nothing. We were getting them better returns." Matt stared at his wife in disbelief. "Sarah, I've seen the files. Mrs. Patterson lost her life savings. The Kowalski family had to sell their home. These people trusted you, and you destroyed their lives." "I never meant for it to go this far," Sarah whispered. "But once you're in, it's hard to get out. Robert said if I tried to leave, he would make sure everyone knew about what I had done. My reputation, our family's reputation. So you kept stealing." "I kept helping people," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Some of the investments didn't work out the way we planned. Some of the clients' families got suspicious and started asking questions. Things got complicated. Matt leaned forward. How complicated, Sarah? How far did it go with Robert? Sarah's silence was answer enough. The affair was written across her face in a way she avoided his eyes and the guilty set of her shoulders. How long? 2 years, she whispered. Matt felt something inside him break. The theft was criminal. The victimization of elderly people was despicable, but the betrayal of their marriage felt personal in a way that cut deeper than professional disappointment. Do you love him? Sarah looked up, tears streaming down her face. I thought I did, but sitting here, looking at you, seeing what I've done to us, I don't know what love is anymore. The decision. Matt spent the night driving through Chicago, past the neighborhoods where he had once patrolled as a young officer, past the precinct where he had spent most of his adult life, past the hospital where he had recovered from his heart attack, while Sarah held his hand and promised to love him through sickness and health. He thought about justice, about duty, about the oath he had taken 32 years ago to protect and serve. He thought about the victims, elderly people who had trusted Sarah with their life savings, their security, their futures. He thought about Mrs. Patterson, living on charity now because she had trusted the wrong person. But he also thought about his children, Michael and Jennifer, both adults now, with careers and families of their own. How would this affect them? How would they cope with learning that their mother was a criminal? How would it affect his grandchildren, who adored their grandmother? Matt drove past the house where he had grown up, where his own parents had taught him about right and wrong, about the importance of integrity and honesty. His father had been a factory worker, his mother a nurse. They had lived paycheck to paycheck, but had never compromised their values, never taken what didn't belong to them. As dawn broke over Lake Michigan, Matt made his decision. It wasn't about what was easy or what would cause the least pain. It was about what was right. At dawn, he returned home. Sarah was waiting in the kitchen, still wearing the dress from the night before. She looked exhausted, defeated, like someone who had been carrying a terrible burden for too long. I came back to face this, she said. Whatever you decide to do. Matt looked at the woman he had loved for nearly 4 decades, the woman who had raised his children, who had held his hand through his father's funeral, who had been his anchor through 32 years of seeing the worst of humanity. Now, she was part of that worst of humanity. Pack a bag, he said quietly. Where are we going? We're going to turn you in. Then we're going to call our children and tell them their mother is a criminal. Sarah's face crumpled. Matt, please. Think about what this will do to our family. Think about Michael's teaching career, Jennifer's work with social services. Think about the grandchildren. I am thinking about our family, Matt said, his voice steady despite the pain in his chest. I'm thinking about the example we set. I'm thinking about the victims you've hurt. I'm thinking about the oath I swore to uphold. But you're retired. You don't have to uphold anything anymore. Matt looked at his wife with a mixture of love and pity. Sarah, I took an oath to protect and serve. That oath doesn't expire when you turn in your badge. It's who you are, not just what you do. Justice and goodbye. The next morning, Matt drove Sarah to the 14th District. The building looked the same as it had 2 days ago, but everything else had changed. Ray Martinez and Detective Chun were waiting, along with federal agents who would be handling the interstate fraud charges. Sarah provided a full confession, identifying her co-conspirators and giving up the locations of remaining stolen assets. She cooperated completely, perhaps hoping that full disclosure would somehow repair the damage she had done to their marriage. This couldn't have been easy, Ray said to Matt as they processed Sarah's arrest. No, Matt replied, watching through the window as Sarah was led away in handcuffs. But it was right. The media attention was immediate and intense. Retired detective turns and criminal wife became a local news story that spread nationally. Matt found himself portrayed as either a hero or a heartless husband, depending on the perspective of the commentator. Sarah was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy charges. Robert Henderson, the operations leader, received 8 years. The victims recovered approximately 60% of their stolen assets through asset forfeiture and restitution orders. Matt's adult children, Michael and Jennifer, struggled to process their mother's crimes. Jennifer, a social worker who had dedicated her career to helping vulnerable populations, was devastated by the nature of the victims. Michael, a high school teacher who had always held his parents up as examples of integrity, worried about how this would affect his own children's understanding of right and wrong. "Why didn't you just handle it quietly?" Jennifer asked during one of their difficult conversations. "Why did it have to be so public?" "Because that's not who I am," Matt said. "That's not who I raised you to be. When you see injustice, you don't look the other way just because it's convenient." "But she's our mother." "Yes, she is. And she's also a criminal who hurt innocent people." Both of those things are true. Chapter 9. New chapter. Matt sold the house on Maple Street, unable to live with the memories of 37 years of marriage that now felt tainted by deception. He moved to a small apartment near Lake Michigan, where he could walk along the shore and think about the choices that had led him to this point. The divorce papers were filed while Sarah was in prison. Matt visited her twice, conversations that were painful but necessary for both of them to find some kind of closure. "Do you hate me?" Sarah asked during their second visit. "I hate what you did," Matt replied. "I hate that you threw away everything we built together. I hate that you hurt innocent people. I hate that you lied to me for years. But I don't hate you. When I get out, do you think we could try again?" Matt considered this for a long moment. "I don't know, Sarah. Trust isn't something you can just rebuild. It's something you have to earn every day through actions, not words." "I understand. Do you?" "Because I need you to understand that the woman who stole from elderly people, who lied to her husband for months, who destroyed families, that woman I can't live with. If we're going to have any chance, that woman has to be gone forever." Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm trying to understand who she was, why she did those things. The prison counselor says I have to take responsibility for my choices." "That's a start. Matt, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I've destroyed everything good in our lives. But I want you to know that the 35 years before this started were real. My love for you, our children, our life together, that was real." Matt believed her, which somehow made everything more painful. If Sarah had been a complete fraud from the beginning, it would have been easier to hate her, easier to move on. But the truth was more complicated. The woman he had loved was real, and she had chosen to become someone else. Epilogue. 3 years later, Matt Stone worked as a volunteer coordinator for a senior citizen advocacy group. He spent his days helping elderly residents avoid the exact type of fraud his wife had perpetrated. It was his way of making amends, of balancing the scales, of finding some purpose in the wreckage of his previous life. The work was rewarding in ways that his police career had never been. Instead of catching criminals after they had committed crimes, he was preventing crimes from happening in the first place. He taught seniors how to recognize scams, how to protect their financial information, how to verify the credentials of people who claim to be helping them. Sarah was released after serving 3 years of her 4-year sentence. She found work as a cashier at a grocery store, the only job she could get with her criminal record. The woman who had once managed complex financial fraud operations now struggled to make ends meet on minimum wage. They met for coffee on neutral ground, Murphy's Diner, where this all began. Sarah looked older, worn down by prison and the weight of her choices. But she also looked cleaner somehow, like she had shed the persona that had consumed her for those 2 terrible years. "I've been thinking about what you said," Sarah told him, "about the woman who did those things having to be gone forever. And I think she's gone. I think she died in that prison cell, and I had to figure out who I was without her." Matt studied his wife's face, looking for signs of the manipulation he had learned to recognize. Instead, he saw something he hadn't seen in years: genuine remorse, real accountability, the beginning of authentic change. "I'm not ready to come home," she said. "I need to prove to myself that I can be the person I used to be. The person you married." Matt nodded. "That's probably wise. But maybe we could have coffee again next week?" Matt Stone, retired police detective, looked at Sarah Thompson Stone, convicted felon, and saw something he had almost given up on: the possibility of redemption. "Maybe we could," he said. Outside Murphy's Diner, Chicago continued its endless cycle of crime and punishment, of justice and mercy, of broken trust, and the hard work of rebuilding it. Matt Stone had learned that sometimes the most important case you work is the one that hits closest to home, and that justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about finding a way forward when everything you thought you knew turns out to be wrong. The badge might be retired, but the oath remained to protect and serve, even when it costs you everything you hold dear.